guys, how's it going? As a result of the current world pandemic and the social isolating, quarantining and so on, I can't invite people around to do podcasts at the studio, so we will be conducting all podcasts via the phone. I am very new to this. I'm going to try my best to make this as good as possible. Now, up first, we have the incredibly talented headshot photographer and film director, Alan Howard. So, Alan Howard of Alan Howard's Headshots, how are you doing?
Very well.
How are you coping with the current times?
Yeah, it's obviously been a bit strange these Corona times. I actually had Corona 2 weeks ago, so that was
you
that
had
was
it.
Fun. Yeah, I got it
Oh my
early.
goodness!
I'm always an early adopter.
You were in it before it was cool.
Yeah, exactly. I'm already bored of it and ready for the next thing.
So, so tell me about it. How did you find out you had it? What was it like?
Like I had a fever and then a cough. I've still actually got a bit of a cough. We're now like 2 weeks later, and you get like it. I mean, it lingers. It's tedious. Like, I mean, I had it in what I think is the 80% of things where it's just like, you know, it's not going to knock you out. It's just an unpleasant week, but that's the percentage you want to be in.
Oh my goodness! I'm glad to hear that you're at least recovering to an extent.
Yeah, no, I'm now fine, and obviously we're just in this very strange period where I live in a live work studio, so I've sort of had some brave souls for a couple of weeks, and then obviously the total lockdown has stopped everything. So yeah, just kind of trying to find things to do at the moment, doing a lot of learning of new things and stuff while I'm in my downtime.
Well, I think that's what people have got to use the time for, right? Is to kind of learn something or just absorb some information. I've used it to kind of watch a lot of films that I'm perhaps not normally going to choose to watch in my free time, and to do a lot of sort of studying of photographic stuff that I don't know much about, just so that I come out of this a slightly better person.
Yeah, no, exactly. To be honest, I've got so many things I want to get done that I've kind of been putting off for ages. At the moment, I'm still in this like, oh my God, what do I pick to do first? I'm like learning to draw, learning some like Photoshop stuff that I sort of put off for ages. Getting back on video editing. I hadn't edited a video for like 10 years. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I should actually pick that back up as a skill. And just like, yeah, I'm playing some computer games and watching movies. Yeah.
It's a lot better than just kind of sitting around doing TikToks and posting them on the internet to annoy other people, right?
Yeah, I'm not on TikTok yet. I was a late comer to Instagram. I'm like, oh right, okay, I'm a bit behind on these.
Yeah, I think I think I'm always happy to just be unfashionable and out of favor and untrendy. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So let's sort of move away from Corona, thankfully, and let's talk about you as a photographer. How did you get started? How long has it been? You know, what pulled you in? How did it all start?
So there's kind of two steps. So I'm 38 now. When I first did any kind of professional photography, I was 16. I used to shoot hip hop album covers for a little label, like not for much money, but I used to get like 100 quid for an album cover, which when you're 16 was very exciting. And it was kind of pocket money, and that was all before uni. So it was a bit strange in that I'd kind of done a bit of professional photography before I even really had considered it as a job. And then I directed music videos for a little bit, never particularly good at it, and then the music industry was kind of collapsing. Like filmmaking's always been my ambition, I think. I've directed one feature film which was about 10 years ago. It was called The Drum and Will. You won't have seen it unless it's people in the US. People in the US may have seen it, because it did okay in the US. It didn't do particularly well in the UK. And then I came like photography, because I write and direct. Photography was just meant to be a way to pay my bills while I'm writing. But at the moment, I'm kind of obsessed at the moment with like I shoot portraits, specifically actors' headshots, and it's such a simple photo. It's such a there's kind of restrictions on what it can be. It's just this sort of very pure little thing, and I'm kind of at the moment it's a really creative outlet for me. I don't know. I've got so into it. I spend all of my time literally thinking about how to perfect these really basic portraits, and I kind of know. I wish I found it earlier. So yeah. To go back to your thing, I've been doing headshots for I think about 8 years now.
Okay,
so about figuring that out now.
So to sort of hone in on headshots then, is that because of your association with actors? It seemed like a logical progression.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's the thing I enjoy the most is working with a person and directing. Like I could, I like directing, and I don't think I could ever do something like photographing like a wedding, because my instinct would be to, be like, hold up there, let's reblock this isn't working. It's just, I don't think I'm particularly good like documentary photographer, although I quite like things like street photography. I don't like shooting them. I like the art and I can see it, but my instinct is always to kind of get in the thick of it and move everyone about and put people where I want them.
Okay. So when it comes to your directing style, when you're doing headshots, how much of it is kind of pre-production where you talk them through what they're going to be doing? How much of it is the fact that they're already an actor, that they know what they're doing? How does that all work out?
Well, that's it, right? It depends on the person. I try and be led by the person as much as possible. Like some people won't really want any direction, and some people you can sort of sense like you need to tell them literally everything. I never sort of decided on how I was going to address that, but I will say definitely all this headshot photography has made me a much better director than I was when I was directing films. And you can tell if you look at my film, it's got some really not brilliant performances in it. And I definitely, because I'd come from like a technical background, I was so much more comfortable just with that bit. So I'd go and chat with the DOP and we would, absolutely nail the shots and everything. And I let some of the performances get away from me. But I think now it's just a question of, you can kind of direct people in any way you want, as long as you're just really respectful of them and you kind of let them go where they want to go, and then kind of nudge them in direction. So actually most of my direction in headshots tends to be like 80% of it just kind of more technical things, like lower chin a little bit, like lower, just little things on like positioning. It's only if I find that they're getting a bit, sometimes it can just be a bit nothingy, and then you just kind of go, well, let's pick a direction to sort of to push it further in. Like if they seem like they have quite an innocent casting, you go, cool, right, let's try and push it more towards like the most innocent kind of look we can get. Or
yeah, no, one of the things I've always found when it comes to sort of directing people when it comes to portraits and whatnot is there are some people it's really good to go with sort of the complimentary way of kind of encouragement, and then there are the other people that it can be quite good to kind of corner them a little bit and push them and see how they in a respectful way, but to sort of push their buttons and see how sort of much you can kind of push them to get a kind of more visceral reaction, or to kind of, if you just ask someone to smile, you never get a real smile. So sometimes it's about pushing them a little bit.
Oh, I almost never, that's like my hardest thing. If people want smiley photos, unless people specifically mention it, then they're probably not going to leave my shoot with a smiley photo. I kind of hate them. It's so difficult to get something like that it doesn't look either cheesy or just really awkward. Like and if you sort of flick through my Insta, you'll then see this is true. I don't think I ever have anyone smiling to camera. Any of the smiles are staged to look like a slight candid thing, like there was someone else in the room.
Yeah, definitely.
That always looks much more natural, because plausibly there could have been. And
I'm looking at your Insta now, and one thing I'd say is it feels like there's a lot of depth to all your images. Obviously, there's something I definitely want to touch upon is your color work, because there's definitely I think that's where the real cinema lies in your images. But you have you have some real depth to it. I think a lot of that is down to having quite a narrow depth of field in a lot of shots, and having some light leaks in front, and having something behind the actor that's not just a flat surface. How do you go about building up your the depth of your shot? How did that style come about?
That's one of the things that I've owned it for a bit, with like the confidence to kind of, because I think in headshots, to be honest, I'm the only person I've seen having anything in the foreground. Like, it's really rare to see it, because I think it's kind of counterintuitive when you're all about like an actor making a connection to stick something between them and the camera. But once you start doing it, it gives you this intriguing like cinematic quality, right? It feels like you're kind of peering in on someone's world if you've got something between you and them. And obviously it's used all the time in movies. So yeah, I like, as you say, 3 layers. Yeah. So, a nice background actor there. And then sometimes either I can try and sort of conflate a bit of lens flare into it, or it will just literally be like things between me and the thing, like a bit of polyboard if I'm in the studio, or like something actually out on the street. But yeah, just something to give it a little bit of framing. It's quite tricky, because I used to kind of, my earlier stuff, I would have these really cinematic shots that looked like shots from movies, but they definitely wouldn't be headshots. You would kind of have to go to people, okay, look, here's your simple headshot, and this will look nice next to it on Spotlight. And it was more of a mock-up of like a production still or something. But now I've started to find like some of my favorite shots are ones which they don't look like a headshot, but they fulfill all the criteria for what a headshot needs to be, in that it's like a nice close-up of the face and it's in portrait and it makes a connection, all of those things. But at the same time, it also looks like a shot from a movie. They're kind of my favorite things, and that's what I try and get in most sessions now. But yeah, there's a lot of depth. Also, I recently moved to, I heard this on one of your other things. Someone else was talking about GFX. I moved to a Fuji GFX, so I have oodles of depth now.
Well, that's perfect. That gives me the perfect segue to talk about camera gear. It's probably my worst subject to talk about, because
really, I'm such a nerd. I'm going to be like all over this.
I absolutely love camera gear, but one of the problems I find is that I do some workshops over the course of the year, and over the last sort of 5 years, I found so many people think that the only difference between a good photo and a bad photo is the gear, and most of the time the problem lies in technique, not in what you're holding.
Yeah. And
so that's why I have that. Sorry, go on. And I so had that, and because what you say, like I do a lot of like depth of field stuff, and I felt for a while that I was relying on narrow depth of field way too much, and for then I moved to Fuji, like regular Fuji's, like an X-T3 for a year and a half. So I was on a crop sensor, which for a portrait photographer is like quite strange, not having a full frame and not having as much depth. But I quite liked it to kind of test myself, to be like, can I still do this stuff with a smaller sensor, and without that just being able to kind of have huge blur. This sounds exactly like my last 12 months. So I was shooting on Canon full frame for about 6 years, and then I switched to the Fuji X-T3. Same thing. I felt like I was being over reliant on sort of being able to just eviscerate backgrounds, and the switch. So I do weddings and I do portraits. I will completely agree. For portraits, it can be a slightly terrifying thing because you lose a weapon essentially.
Yeah.
But I'm because of my wife, I've now switched to Sony because she wanted to switch to Sony, so I've just done what I'm told.
Okay.
But having now used a GFX, I used the 50S.
Yeah, that's what I have. They're a really good price point now. Like the 50S. It's like I didn't want to spend £6,000 on it. That was too mental. But my 50S, I think it was under £3,000 secondhand. It was a very reasonable, like it was the same price you're used to paying for a full frame, a high end full frame camera, which seemed much more reasonable to me.
So when you're conducting a shoot, so you have an actor come into the studio, you're gonna go through how many sets are you doing, how much are you shooting per set, what's the sort of time scale?
Actually, I shoot a lot less shots now on the GFX because I shoot everything manual focus, and it's a bit slower to process. I shoot everything tethered as well, so it's a little bit of a slower kind of, each click and shot is a bit slower. So probably,
if you don't mind me jumping in real quick,
sorry, please do.
Why manual focus and what lens are you using?
I shoot, so I don't have any of the actual GFX lenses because what I wanted is this huge depth of field. And I probably shouldn't even say this because so few people seem to realize this, and it's kind of key. Okay, so the GFX has this sensor that's like 1.8 times the size of a full frame sensor, but almost pretty much any lens you get, full frame lens over about 80 mils, although to be honest, even most 50s will. Almost all portrait lenses cover the full sensor. And most of them are sharp pretty much all the way across it. So like, so my main go-to lenses, let's have a look through some of these. The Zeiss 135 f2 is incredible, covers the whole thing. The Zeiss 100 f2 macro, that's incredible and covers the whole thing. That's also, by the way, the sharpest lens I've ever seen in anything. Like, for most people, you have to go, okay, we're not using this. It's punishing. It's like you need to be really young and drink a lot of water to work to get away with the 100 or the Zeiss 85. So basically, just if you have Zeiss have recently, I say recently, in the last 5 years or so, they changed all these lenses out for what is now their Milvus range. Before those, the non-weather sealed ones, Zeiss just had these beautiful black metal, like manual focus lenses they made for full frame, and I've pretty much got a full set of those. And certainly for a portrait photographer, for a full set, I've got like the 85, 100, and 135, and they all work incredibly well on the GFX. There's a couple of other ones which are just really good portrait lenses. The Nikon 105 DC, which stands for defocus control, which was a lens Nikon made with a specific focus on bokeh, and it's pretty amazing, and also covers the full frame on the GFX. And they're all manual focus. Well, all the Zeiss ones are actually just manual focus lenses, but the other ones, because they're adapted and there is no way to get them autofocus on the GFX. Also, from what I understand, the autofocus on the 50S is pretty slow anyway. I think the 100 is better, but yeah.
So I used it with the 63mm. Obviously the Fuji lens, the 63mm. I didn't find it bad, but the focus is fine. But I just found on a couple of occasions it did do quite a bit of seeking.
Right.
When it wasn't reliant on face detect, it was seeking quite a bit.
Right. And I
mean I suppose that's the low end, right? That's the low end lens,
exactly.
I guess.
It is the low end of, well, and it doesn't have I get confused. No, it doesn't have phase detect. It only has contrast detect, I think. So it's like a generation behind what you would be used to with, like, your Sony is going to have way better autofocus than it by a long, long way.
Yeah, but that has no soul.
No, actually, that's true. I did used to shoot Sony, and I feel that actually you're right. Everything else has. I have a Nikon Z6 as my sort of second camera now, and it's like the Sony but with a soul. It does feel a little bit like every other company has a bit more heart to them. Even Canon, I don't really like Canon, but yeah.
Canon to me is like the really good looking X that had the worst personality. Like, I miss it, but yeah, no, I'm well off the Canon train in a lot of ways. But everyone I talk to about the Sony, I say it's completely soulless, and everybody agrees with me. So it's hard to put into words, but everyone agrees.
It's for the people who want the biggest technical clout for their buck. And but I don't think anyone's going to go, oh no, but it fills me with passion. Whereas Fuji, people are going to talk non-stop about soul to explain why it's only got a tiny sensor.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to compensate, and I'm completely on board. So let's go back to your shooting process. You're not shooting too much, like, set per set. How many sets are you doing with actors and?
I don't really, I don't really time it. Well, it's probably about sort of 5 setups in the studio in a standard session. But the way I now have it, I can change a setup very quickly because, okay, this is going to require a whole other conversation. But what I use is, as for my key light, is a Kino flow, like a 4-foot Kino flow, with I have the bulbs are in, I think we call it a salt and pepper configuration. So you have like daylight color, then tungsten color, then daylight color, then tungsten color, and you can turn them on and off independently. So what I'll tend to do is start, and everything else I keep in the studio daylight balanced. So what I'll do is start with like half tungsten, half daylight as my key light, and then everything else will be daylight balanced. So there'll be this quite sort of cinematic blue to the background with a warm on the subject. And I can just, to change a setup, I can just switch it to, say, daylight for the key light and change my white balance in camera, and then suddenly everything will be warm. Or you can go the other direction and switch it to fully tungsten for the key light. Everything in the background will go really blue. So like without moving and just with flicking a few switches, I can do kind of 3 different color tones in the studio. So yeah, that would be like 3 setups in 20 minutes without really changing much at all if they just change a top or whatever.
Okay. So obviously in the studio you get to be God because you're controlling all the lighting and you're basically in control of the elements. When you go out of the studio, do you like that sort of lack of control, or which side do you prefer?
Well, that's the really I definitely prefer control. I am a total control freak. And that's what's really tricky in the studio. Sometimes I try and bring natural light into it, and it just annoys me because I'll get like a really nice shot and then I'll just be annoyed because I only managed to get it because it was a really sunny day. And then I'm just like, well, that's only going to happen about like 10% of the days in the UK. So it's annoying that I can't replicate it exactly. Whereas if you get a shot in the studio with entirely artificial light, I'm like, brilliant. That one goes straight in my, recipe book of something I can.
Well, the only time we get good weather in the UK is when we're in isolation. We get good weather in isolation.
It's been lovely, right?
Yeah, it's been mind-blowingly annoying.
Yeah. No, outside I find it. I don't know. If it's sunny and I've got this like really contrasty light, cool, and we can absolutely find. That's really interesting and exciting to play with. But generally, the problem is it's just flat and just everything looks the same, and there's no interesting bit of light to find because it's just a flat, cloudy day, and there's not a lot you can do with it.
Absolutely. It's I think if you're going to be a photographer in England, you either have to learn to use your own lighting or you have to learn to love overcast flatness.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? And how much lighting can you? I've tried various different ways of like sort of tying monopods to lamp posts and stuff. And I sometimes bring like. I usually bring at least one light outside, but usually I just use it as like a kicker, so nothing with a modifier on it. But I have tried, taking big. And obviously, the problem with a flat day is you can't really use a particularly hard light source as like a key light because it's just going to look really, really fake. So you have to balance out like a flat day. You need like a giant umbrella or something, which would be fine, except. England also has the tendency to have like 20-mile-an-hour winds most days, and so like umbrellas and softboxes are just really, really challenging to use. So usually the only extra light I bring outside is just like a little AD200, one of the little Godox ones, just stuck on like a tripod, and that just gives me like a rim light kicker. And then I'll just contour it in Photoshop to try and make it look a bit more punchy.
Yeah, and especially like with looking at some of your images now, some of the I think having that really like thin depth of field really helps as well to kind of pull someone when the light's maybe not pulling them out of the background.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we could just sort of change gears and just talk about your sort of influences over the time that you've been doing it, I'm assuming quite a lot of it comes from films rather than necessarily photographers. Who are your influences?
Well, it's almost entirely going to be, I'm such a photography philistine. I barely was aware of sort of successful photographers. I like discovered Annie Leibovitz like 3 years ago. I was like, oh my God, look how good the color grade on all this stuff is. No, like for me, it's like I grew up with, so like probably David Fincher would be the biggest influence. And just
we are friends.
Good.
He's one of my absolute favorites. So I'm okay.
And definitely visually, you can find like a frame from a Fincher film and you can say, yeah, that's a Fincher film. Obviously, he's not like the colorist, but his look and the effect he had over almost all of cinema is really, really profound. And also, we're going to talk about coloring. He's the master of the green channel. Like, it's so good. He uses green in such a lovely way that can either be like really sort of 70s-y, old-fashioned, or like, you know, deeply modern and kind of clear. Oh my God. Anyway, so Fincher and green, we like Kubrick. I love Kubrick. That was my first person when I discovered like what a director is, and you go, oh my God, okay, this guy is the business. But yeah, they're almost all going to be kind of Spike Jonze, maybe from a kind of, I like his aesthetic and this kind of more so in, I mentioned I directed music videos a little bit, things like the early sort of Spike Jonze with Beastie Boys and stuff like that kind of dirty, edgy aesthetic, and they're not really caring. It doesn't look super polished, and that just kind of playing with the form in that way. I think that would be a big.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching. So I'm a huge Fincher fan anyway, and I remember watching Zodiac.
What's your favorite one, by the way? I was going to say, because Zodiac is like my favorite film of all time. I think it's really underrated.
It's one of the most underrated films, I think, in terms of because he's got so many in his catalog. People don't even realize that exists in most conversations I've had where you talk about him. And one of the things I loved about it was that it's the pinnacle of movement for the sake of it being important to the story, as opposed to just constantly moving the camera and constantly, everything felt considered in that film, and it made you focus on the story so much more than on the framing. The film's beautiful, but it kind of happens organically, as opposed to it just feels like changing shots and movement for the sake of it. I love that film so much.
But there's a shot above. You probably know about this. There's a shot above the taxi cab before the taxi driver is killed. That's a spoiler for anyone who's not aware of the works of the Zodiac killer. There's a shot that's it's done as if it was like a drone, and the drone was sort of locked onto the top of the cab, so it turns exactly with the cab in a very kind of, it's just unsettling, because it's a shot that definitely when that film came out we'd never seen before, because it feels like a giant crane. That shot is entirely CGI. There's no real elements in it. It's basically, it's like watching Toy Story 2. They spent $1.5 million to essentially get that effect of the camera being locked to the top of a cab.
I did not know that.
It's an amazing like piece of auteuring that I don't think they'd let any other director do.
No, definitely not. He's definitely I don't even know how to describe him. He's obviously incredibly specific in his and elaborate in the way that he puts together scenes, and close-ups are intentional, and they're meant to serve a purpose, which is always one of my biggest problems with. I watch a lot of films, and I just find constantly moving the camera defies the point of having the blocking, defies the point of the performances, if the viewer never gets to settle into an angle and actually understand the scale of the scene. Not to sound like I know what I'm talking about by any stretch.
No, it's terrible. I watched the film Sling Blade. Billy Bob Thornton directed it. I think it's where people first saw Billy Bob Thornton. It's like late 90s, I think. So I'd never seen it before, I know, but I remember it being quite a big deal at the time. But it's directed by Billy Bob Thornton, and I don't think he was particularly interested in like. Well, no, it'd be unfair to say, but basically it's done in about maybe 10 long takes, because it was a play previously. So it's just it's essentially he's just adapted the play, but just had like these sort of 8-minute vignettes just kind of play out. And it's kind of what you're talking about. It has that tension of a play, because you know the take is just going to run and run, and you get to go look at these people acting because you know they're not editing together a performance. It's like the performance is there for you to observe.
Well, I think that's where sort of action scenes and choreographed scenes, most of cinema now is just so choppy and constantly cutting in and out of different angles. I think the reaction to that is films like 1917, where it's the tension in the length of the take is so amazing.
No,
I think it's just a reaction to how bad it is in cinema generally.
No, I get it, but there's a different tension in 1917, and I find that you get the same tension in Children of Men, which has these really long takes, but it totally takes me out of it. I'm just worried for the people in the take, and I'm going, oh, I'm worried people are going to mess up a line. I'm looking for like squibs not going off and stuff. I'm totally thrown out of the scene. It's really strange. I actually can't. Less so, I felt a little safer in 1917. Children of Men, I find unwatchable because it just puts me on edge in like a really bizarre technical way. Russian Ark, don't even get me started. I decided not to watch that. It's ridiculous. The whole thing was actually I think it's one actual 90-minute take, which I find insufferable.
That's due to your obviously your insider knowledge of it. That's why the tension is for you, I guess.
But I think you'd be hard pressed to watch that film without it. At least, depending on how quickly you notice, you're at some point you're going to go, there's a lot of long takes in this film. Even any person who's going to notice, it would be like watching 1917 without going, is it going to cut at some point?
Yeah. Well, do you know what? It's funny because I brought up, I thought 1917 technically is the best film I've seen for a very, very long time.
Yes.
And we were very blessed late last year with films like Parasite, Lighthouse, 1917, and so on. And I brought up 1917 to someone as a recommendation, and the guy said, that's not realistic to the real war. And I was like, okay, I have no interest in continuing this conversation with you whatsoever. You 40-year-old man that's never been to war.
Yeah. And also the First World War, not just the second. It's like, nah, it wouldn't have been like that. But no, it seemed realistic enough. What bit didn't he think was realistic?
Do you know what? For me, the thing that sold 1917 to me was the fact that was the casting. They were boys. They weren't men. Yeah. Like every old war film, everyone's got a moustache and is like 55, and it makes no sense because those weren't the people.
And proper acting as well, right? I mean, I think that's the Sam Mendes thing of like, they're going to be talented theatre actors because these are people you need to know are going to be able to sustain long takes, and it's not good because that many technical elements that can go wrong. The last thing you want is someone like fluffing a line when you've just dropped like $2.5 million worth of pyrotechnics around them.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, like you look at Benedict Cumberbatch has an incredibly small role in sort of in perspective of the whole film, but you wouldn't want to give that to someone that's kind of, they'll give it a go, you know. We'll see how it turns out.
This is going to sound really mean, but like, do you notice in the Harry Potter films, whenever like the later ones, it's like, I mean, they're okay, but whenever they have long takes, you're just like, oh my god, it suddenly becomes crawling, and it's just, you know, they weren't quite. I think they edit around those performances quite a lot when I mean, it's not their fault. The kids were basically learning to act by doing, you know, and it was like. But whenever they try and do, there's like a 1.5 minute take on the train, and you're just going, oh bloody hell, this is going really slow.
Yeah, no, it's I think that obviously a lot of people don't realize the difference between theatre actors and movie actors in the sense that a movie actor does a lot of short bursts and they get a lot of cracks at the whip, and a theatre actor, you know, you're in for the long haul, and you don't get to kind of redo it and make everyone close their eyes for a minute and sort of shout, you know, action. As far as it goes with you, from a visual sense, what films do you recommend people watch to kind of inspire them in a sense as a photographer?
What are ones that are really striking? Well, because we've been talking about 1917, any kind of Roger Deakins ones, but everyone talks about them so much. Actually, I'll tell you what, The Man Who Wasn't There, which is a Coen Brothers film that Roger Deakins shot back when he was still shooting all the Coen Brothers films. I think he kind of pretty much still is shooting all the Coen Brothers films in black and white.
Yep.
That one is probably the film you most watch and just go, actually, everything in it looks like a poster. It's so visually arresting. So from a stills perspective, because they like every frame looks like a still. Also, I think it's technically quite interesting because it was shot on film. This was in like late days of film, but Kodak were no longer making the black and white film that Roger Deakins wanted, and I think it was shot on color film and then cross-processed to black and white in quite interesting ways. I can't remember exactly, but I remember it being quite a, like all things are really technically interesting with Roger Deakins. Oh, fun things from Roger Deakins as well, like that are really fun from portraits. So I do shoot with long lenses mostly, but if you watch any Roger Deakins film, he uses quite wide lenses for close-ups, so usually like a 28 or a 35. So
there's a really good interview with one of the Coen brothers where he talks about that. And he says, they're filming him for the interview, and he just hijacks the interview and starts sort of not like telling the cameraman what mistakes he's made. And he's like, you see, the way you've got this framed up, you're using I think it was like a 90 mil or whatever. You're using a fairly long lens. There's no personality to this. I'm over there. I'm not in the conversation with the person listening to it. Whereas and he makes them switch a lens and they switch it to a wider. He's like, now bring it in closer. And they bring it in closer. And he's like, now it feels like you're having a conversation with me. Now it feels like we know each other. And now it feels like you're part of the scene.
Well, there you go. And certainly in terms of something, which is quite interesting from headshots, it's like, that's that trade-off. So a headshot should be about, it should be flattering generally, depending on the person's casting. But the other way to go is it should all be about character. So shooting someone like in quite a close-up portrait with a 28 is not usually very flattering. It's going to exaggerate facial features. But depending on the person's casting type, especially with these, like, we're talking about like Coen Brothers films, all of the characters are such characters. Like that could be the way to shoot the headshot. You want to be exaggerating what makes that actor unique, rather than just being whatever the most flattering look of them is.
Well, would you say that the difference as well between sort of cinematically creating a still and then cinema itself is that because it's a photograph, you have a lot longer to study every element of it. It stays still for you to look at it. So the unflattering parts of it become more and more prominent the longer you look at it. Where with movies and with anything moving, essentially, because it's moving, you don't have time to completely focus in on one element as much.
Yeah, it's both of those things, but it's also kind of like, because it is just one frame, like you don't get, there's no other frames to kind of disprove anything you get from it. So it's whatever like expression they were at in just that moment, you're making your entire judgment on that person in that, which is like a real strength of them. They don't need to get every shot right in a session to suddenly have a moment that's really, really intriguing. And the same goes for like costume and background and all that. Like my backgrounds aren't, the background doesn't need to be perfect. You just need to have one angle that can kind of look like it's perfect, kind of thing.
Yeah. So do you do a lot of sort of set design in the way that you build up the image that you're doing?
I wish I sort of studied and paid more attention to like arts class. But yeah, I paint a lot of polyboards and things, and I have quite a lot of kind of canvas backdrops, but I don't use them a huge amount. I find them quite frustrating because you're kind of, if you order from people like Gravity Backdrops, you'll order like 3 or 4, and you only get to see them online, and then they arrive and they're like 400 or 500 quid each. They're pretty serious investments. And then I only ever, from each 3 I get, I like one of them. And the others are sort of, and I just find it really, so I've got loads of canvas backdrops I half like, and a couple that I use for absolutely everything.
Well, I need to drop some money on some new backdrops. So maybe if you've got any that you don't like, we can make a deal on that, and I can take some of your rejects.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, so from obviously right now the sort of climate of the world is a bit ridiculous. No one knows what's happening tomorrow. People barely understand what happened yesterday. What sort of ambition wise going forwards, are you looking to sort of get back into doing more video work?
I don't do video work outside of directing. I don't really want to like film anyone else's thing. I've got a couple of things, like I may at some point make another film. I've got some things I've written, and I'm sure this sort of quarantine period will probably lead to some writing. But I don't really know on those things. I've got a couple of things I may do, just little things to get my foot back into that, like a little sitcom pilot I wrote that I may shoot. But no, in that, like, no, it's like either I've got two scripts which will either be made at the kind of one at about 4 million quid and one at about 1 million quid, and they'll either be made at that level or they won't be made at all. So
right,
I don't know, that's stuff that, like, there are literally interviews with me 10 years ago talking about one of them and going, well, hopefully that's going to be next, so I don't want to make the mistake again. Doing that.
So if I can ask, you just said that you wouldn't want to shoot something for someone else. Is that down to sort of being a control freak, as you put it?
Oh, kind of, but also more like pick your thing, really. I don't think I'd be, I don't know, it's the kind of jack of all trades kind of thing. It's like, and I only do one very specific kind of photography, and that's taken me like 10 years to start getting right, just doing basically one photo kind. So yeah, I don't think I would be a particularly good either cinematographer or any of those things.
Something that I don't get very often to ask photographers, because generally speaking, they'll sort of duck this question. I think people, I think it's going to apply really well to you. 5 people you want to photograph, they can be alive or dead, but 5 people you wish you could have a sort of headshot session with.
Who picks dead people? What, like,
well,
Victorian?
You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Okay. I mean, that would be amazing, though. Tom Hardy. I would like
Tom Hardy. Yeah.
Tom Hardy. Yeah, that would be. Can they all be Tom Hardy? No. It's like those people who, all right, from a more character. Just because we're just talking about like Coen Brothers, maybe someone like Stanley Tucci or someone like that. Someone who's going to be like just super character. So yeah, either super character or super gravitas is really good to photograph. So Idris Elba, maybe, like, he would just.
Well, you've got something in common as well, because you've both had corona.
Yeah, corona buddies. Yeah, Tom Hanks.
There you go.
No, I'm kidding. No, I'm not just going to pick corona people. Well, no, but once this passes, me and Idris will be okay. We can both go and hang out without the risk of infecting each other. It'll be
exactly
fun.
Yeah, you can cough on each other to your heart's content.
Yeah. Who else? Who would be a really interesting girl to photograph? I don't know. Maybe someone with like a. I don't know. I quite like kind of angry looking people, or maybe someone a bit more. I don't know. Maybe someone like Lady Gaga or something. Just like go really. Someone who would want like a real look. I don't know.
But I think the cool thing with someone like Lady Gaga, and I've seen it done a couple of times with characters like her, where so much of their personality is in the aesthetic. When they do a photo shoot where it's really stripped back and it's more about the person than the character, I always find that really interesting.
Yeah, like either way, it would be interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
or
definitely.
Maybe like Billie Eilish. I would like to do a Billie Eilish album cover just because they look exactly like I wanted album covers to look like 20 years ago. They've got this really like understated aesthetic that I really like.
Yeah. All right, so we'll go for 4 Tom Hardys and an Idris Elba.
Yeah, that's fine.
So what I always want to try and do is make sure people know where they can find you at the end of these. So this is your opportunity to give me your websites, your Instagrams, wherever people can find your work.
So website is headshot.co.uk, head-shot, shot.co.uk. And my Instagram is Alan Howard Headshots, AlanHoward, Headshots, HEADSHOTS. God, I told you I was late to Instagram. It's like, that's why I've got like the longest handle in the world.
Do you know what? So I actually discovered your website before I discovered your work, and I have to make a confession. This is a little end to this podcast, but I do have to make a confession. The first time I found your website, I did call you a dick, and to myself. But I want to explain why. Because your website head-shot.co.uk is a URL I would love to have.
Yeah, I was like,
what a dick! He got there first.
Yeah, but I mean,
cool.
there's like 15 other reasons for thinking I'm a dick on my website.
No, it was literally just a URL. Okay, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I hope it's quelled the boredom slightly.
Super fun, mate. Best thing to do.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cheers, then.
I once felt I'm done with the defense. Drove back and climbed over your fence. Had to show you that I was a mess. So you were shrugging your shoulders. I'm closed off, that's what I told you. Soon enough, everything started to change. There's no going back, no going back. There's no going back to your old life. Not living in the past, we're over that. I'm feeling it tonight, riding on the dizzying heights. Riding on the dizzying heights. Like nothing could stop us. Sunsets, remember the colors. They were wrong, it was way more than a dream. We climbed up, over the hillside. So right, we stood there all wide-eyed. You and I, floating on air in my mind. Cause there's no going back, no going back. There's no going back to your old life. Not living in the past, I'm feeling it tonight, riding on the dizzying heights. I'm standing on the dizzying heights. You make everything so much better. To your old life, not living in the past, we're over that. I'm feeling it tonight, riding on the dizzying heights. I'm standing on the dizzying heights. I'm standing on the dizzying heights. I'm standing on the dizzying heights. Everything's so much better. Riding high on your river, you and I, we're climbing way up together, standing on dizzy heights. You make everything so much better. Riding high on your river, you and I, we're climbing way up together, standing on the dizzying heights.